So the STP is one of two main routes, I would say. So the other one is the portfolio, which I, of course, haven't done myself because I'm on the STP, but it would have been the route that I would have gone down if I hadn't secured the in-service position. So no fees to us. So therefore, you're getting a master's essentially for free as alongside your training. And yeah, everything is covered. Your salary is paid for by the NHS. So 3 years, 4 days a week in the lab, 1 day study day. Each year there's 3 trips to Manchester, which all of them are 1 week long, apart from in the first year, the very first visit is 3 weeks. And then the more formal ones, as part of the masters, as part of the university, you have an exam each summer. So in first year, it's online. In second and third year, it's in person, written in a hall in Manchester, how the typical exam would be.
Welcome everyone to the new episode of Let's Talk Embryology. Today we have Georgia, who works at a fertility clinic in London. She's an embryologist. Today's episode is going to be super important because Georgia is currently in the midst of STP, which is a training program for embryologists in the UK, and she is going to explain to us the entire journey that she is on for the STP. So this is going to be like a guideline episode towards STP. Welcome, Georgia, to the episode of Let's Talk Embryology. How are you today?
Yes, good. Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Perfect. So tell us, what do you do at the clinic?
So I perform all andrology procedures. I can do dish setup. So that's both the dish setup that we do the day before treatment and also the dishes that are made throughout the day, which are sort of, without going into the sort of scientific detail, slightly different. I do all of those dishes. I do paperwork setup. I do egg collections, embryo transfers, FERP checks, freezing, thawing. I'm currently doing some egg vit and egg thaw training, and then it'll be ICSI training, which I've sort of started as well. It's all very sort of all goes along together. It's not sort of a thing where you do one thing at a time. So yeah, pretty much everything except, ICSI and biopsy. But that'll be hopefully in the next sort of couple of years. And then we do admin roles as well on the side of the clinical work that we do sort of day to day.
Right. That's still a lot to do in a day.
Yes.
I'm sure there's still more things to learn, but still at this stage, you still do a lot of clinical procedure. It looks like that.
Yeah. And the admin roles, yeah, I know we wanted to talk a little bit about that as well. The admin roles are sort of split among the team. So the embryology team will be assigned. So there could be 2 people, maybe sometimes more, assigned to a particular admin role, admin task. So you could be on your own or in a team. And my particular one is embryo storage. So I am in a subsection of embryo storage where patients, if they want to reach out and request the discard of their gametes or embryos, specifically eggs or embryos, there's a different team for sperm, they can do so. And I am part of the team that deals with that. And then there's a different team that deals with the expiry of samples. And that's sort of a whole nother ball game. I think what an interesting point about sort of these admin tasks is that at a big clinic, you're able to split those tasks and have different people on different sort of teams. At a small clinic where a lab team, might be 3 or 4 people, which I have had experience of both, everyone has to do everything because there aren't enough people to be assigned a singular admin task. And there are pros and cons of both, because if you're assigned a specific task, like I have now, you can sort of really focus on that, and you can really, I don't know, it's very streamlined because you are focusing on one thing. But then I guess the con of that is that you don't have then the exposure to the admin tasks of, the other areas. And they're all very interesting. So it's good to get a little taste of all of the different ones. So That's sort of a key difference if you're working in a small team or a big team in a lab.
Right. Makes sense. Yeah, it makes a huge difference. I think the number of team players that
Yeah.
you have, you can divide the work and still manage everything nicely rather than working in a small group. Makes sense. Yeah. Why did you choose embryology? Why are you working at a fertility clinic?
So it was, I think looking back now, I can see what led me to it. It wasn't a particularly sort of I woke up one day and chose the career. So there were some things in the background sort of personally. I remember being on holiday in my teen years while I was studying, doing my GCSEs, I think picking A-level options. And I met a couple who were had successful fertility treatment. And they were telling us all about it sort of over dinner. And I remember thinking at the time, that's so interesting. And, you know, it was my first real exposure to the concept of IVF. And then that was sort of, I guess, in the back of my mind. I then studied biomedical science, which we will talk about later on, that was very wide in terms of, you know, what we studied. And my favorite units in that happened to be reproductive science. So that, I think, was a real sort of turning point in what drove me towards it eventually. And then it ended up being my final dissertation of that degree happened to be in reproductive science because it was my favorite module. And I then used that final dissertation to then apply as a trainee. So it sort of just happened through the love of the content of my undergrad degree. Yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, it does, definitely.
Yeah.
And also, I know that you are in the midst of your STP.
Mhm.
Can you just explain to us what are the routes before we talk about STP? Can you just explain to us what are the routes of becoming an embryologist here in the UK?
So the STP is one of two main routes, I would say. So the other one is the portfolio, which I, of course, haven't done myself because I'm on the STP, but it would have been the route that I would have gone down if I hadn't secured the in-service position. So the portfolio is very similar. So the STP is essentially a way of making a portfolio, but the portfolio is sort of yourself, whereas the STP, you have a lot of guidance, a lot of structure, and it's through a school. And I know we're going to talk about sort of more details of the STP, but the portfolio is very much you are independently creating your portfolio, and you still have to show that you've learned the same things, you've carried out the same things, and essentially you'll have the same portfolio at the end. It's just how you've made it. It's in your own time as opposed to being allocated protected study time. So I think, you know, without having done it myself, I think the portfolio is potentially more time consuming, and it would take a lot of I don't know what the word is, self-direction, because there is less guidance, less structure. But I know a lot of people that have done it, have enjoyed it, have successfully completed it. They end up doing the same sort of panel interview at the end to ultimately have the registration. So there are a lot of similarities. But yeah, I think ultimately the portfolio does have less guidance, and it's potentially a little bit trickier.
Right. And is it why you chose STP instead of portfolio?
Yes. I
Right.
thought that the 4-day working week in terms of being in the lab and clinical work was a very sort of fair structure to the program. I think having that protected day every week to do the STP work and do the do everything that it requires, I think is brilliant. So doing the portfolio in your own time when you're in the lab 5 days a week sounds like a lot. So yeah, ultimately that is one of the huge benefits of the STP, I think.
Right, right. By the sounds of it, it looks like portfolio also takes a bit longer to complete as compared to STP. Does it work like that?
Yeah, it can do. I believe it depends on your previous experience. So if you have already been, so I'd already been working as an embryologist for 3 years, I think, before I started the STP. So if you started the portfolio after 3 years of already being an embryologist, that work you can incorporate into the portfolio, so it wouldn't be sort of wasted time as such. You wouldn't have to then start from scratch. So in that case, I probably would have finished the portfolio maybe sooner than the STP. But if you are starting in a lab fresh and you're training from, then yes, it'll be about 5 years, I think, minimum, whereas the STP is 3.
Right. Right. Makes sense. And how did you apply for STP? Did you give any sort of exams, any applications?
So no exams. I believe they used to actually, which is interesting, but they don't anymore. I know that direct entry have to do a situational judgment test, but apart from that, no exams. In service, definitely no exams to get onto it. There are
Right.
once you're on. The process was you have some sort of a sort of informal interview at your workplace. Some people do formal interviews. It really depends where you're working. I think the in-service route can really depend on your lab, on your sort of employer. But in-service tends to be more informal, I think, than the direct entry, from what I've heard. So there were no real hurdles. I guess the hurdle is having proven to your employer that you are capable of, what the STP involves, and they think that you are and are happy to put you forward. It's ultimately their action of putting you forward which gets you onto it.
Right. Right. There'll be a lot of viewers and listeners who don't know what direct and in-service routes are. So can you just tell us a bit more about what these two routes are and what also the situation judgment test is about?
So the direct entry is where you apply on the NHS website, sort of through a platform called Oriel, I think, if I remember correctly. And you apply directly, you have to do a personal statement, you have to answer some questions in quite a lot of detail. There's a word limit, and go through an application process, basically. And then you're shortlisted or longlisted, shortlisted, and then there's an interview process. It's very competitive and there are very few spaces. Whereas the in-service way is you're already working in a clinic and the clinic put you forward for the STP. So there's no technical limit to how many, I'm sure there is, with funding, but there's a lot more in service. I would say probably double at least the in-service positions to the direct entry. And yeah, I think that's probably the key difference. The situational judgment test for direct entry is a way for them to, again, bring those numbers down because so many people apply and there are so few spaces. And it's about the NHS sort of core values and, skills of being a healthcare professional. So they present situations and you have to, it's multiple choice and you have to pick which response, but they're very similar. So the 4, let's say, responses to a certain situation, there are very slight differences in them. So it's tricky. I have done one myself when I did a direct entry a few years back. And yeah, it is tricky.
Right. Right. Is there anything else apart from your test? After the test, so are there any stages or after the test you directly get the position on the program?
So after the situational judgment test and the sort of written work that you do for the direct entry, it then goes to the long list, short list, and then there are still interviews. So there's still quite a few stages to get through.
Right, right. So I think in service is a much easier route. Of course, you need to be working at a clinic beforehand to go through in service, but I think it's a much easier route to take if you're going on to STPV since you bypass all these steps in between.
Yes, I think it is easier in many ways. It's also risky because you don't know how long the wait is in service. You have to make sure the
Right.
clinic takes in service STPs. Lots of clinics don't. There are lots of clinics in the UK now which have their own version. So there are some chains of clinics that have their own versions of training programs, which aren't quite as structured and well known as the STP. So yes, you have to pick where you work and work well and trust the process. And it takes a lot of patience, I think, and a lot of resilience. So So it's difficult in other ways, but yes, it's more straightforward, I think, in terms of hurdles.
Right, right. I imagine this program must be a lot competitive as well, since this is the NHS program, UK-wide training course. I think there will be a lot of applications as compared to the positions that
Yes.
they offer.
Yeah. I think, I mean, the stats are out there. I think one year it was something like they had 9 positions and maybe 200 people applied.
Wow,
Or yeah, I think it's really, I know it varies year on year. And they do have more spaces this year, interestingly. Um, but yeah, it's tough.
right. Yeah. 9 places for 200
Mm.
applications sounds a lot already.
Yeah.
Wow. And do you pay any kind of fees? Which university do you attend after you get selected?
So another sort of beauty of the STP, no fees. I mean, there are, but not for you.
Okay.
So the NHS, of course, are paying for you to attend the program, and it's part of their. There was there was something that happened when that about 15 years ago, I think, where the government decided that they needed to put more funding and money and into science and training scientists, and that's where they came up with the STP. So
Hmm.
they are trying to increase the people that are, being trained and working in these important sort of hidden positions, I think is what they refer to them as. Um, Also raise awareness, help people sort of understand that these jobs are out there. Um, so funding wise, that's all covered. So no fees to us. So therefore you're getting a master's essentially for free as alongside your training. Um, and yeah, everything is covered. Your salary is paid for by the NHS. Even if you are in service, that goes through the employer, and is a set salary. And so everyone gets the same, unless the London waiting. But um, everyone's on the same sort of banding for the scientist training program. Um, yeah,
Well, it,
sorry,
it
you
sounds like a
spoiled
good
too
deal
much.
with all the
Mhm.
funding and everything in place already.
Yeah, yeah, it is. It's very good. I mean, having a master's paid for is, I mean, a huge thing. I think that often gets
Hmm.
overlooked. Actually, you have to remind yourself sometimes. Oh my goodness, that's
Yeah.
really lucky. Um, So so yeah, and the training program, I mean, you are learning, you are training, and you are still being paid, a full-time salary. So it's it's a very fortunate position to be in, I
Hmm.
think.
Right, right. Which university do you go to for the modules?
So for all of the STP, it's all done through Manchester Metropolitan
Okay.
University, and they are the sort of accredited link university for the program. Um, There is a sort of semi-link with the Manchester Healthcare School that links between UniOv and ManMet.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, everything is based in Manchester. And you go 3 times a year for 3 years.
Okay.
Um, and yeah, everything is through them, and they offer a lot of support, a lot of guidance, not just academically, but through the whole thing. And whether you're direct or in service, once you start, everything is the same for everyone. There's no difference then once you're on the program. Um, it's Everyone has the same access to the school. You're all going to Manchester together. You're all on the same masters. You're all on the same training course. It's just that slight difference of how you got there in the first place, but then everything is the same.
Right, right. I think you already answered a bit more about my next question, but I'm
Mm.
sure there are a lot more things to talk about. So, in terms of the structure of the course, I know it's a 3-year course. How is the course structured since you're working at the same time and also completing a part-time master's? Can you just tell us a bit more about how it is structured in the 3-year?
Mhm. So 3 years, 4 days a week in the lab, 1 day study day. Each year, there's 3 trips to Manchester, which all of them are 1 week long. Apart from in the first year, the very first visit is 3 weeks, and that's because it's you've just joined the
Okay,
STP,
right,
it's your first visit, and there's a lot to cover, and so it's a big trip, long trip, but then after that it's just week each time. So that's the structure for the visits. Then in terms of the university component of the STP, it's always running alongside each other. So that's the main thing. You've got your clinical training that's happening 4 days a week in the lab. You've got your university work, which is ongoing for 3 years. And then you've got your training competencies, which are also ongoing, which we'll talk more about. The university work, though, they are kind. They do spread it out. So there's 3 key pieces of university work to do per year, and the deadlines are split over the academic year. So you have time to sort of time manage and prioritize what you need to do. Same with the exams. The exams are always in the summer, so you know when they're coming, you know to prepare. And then the training activities, which are the written work, which is done through the workplace, but then sort of peer assessed. That's ongoing and that's constant. So that's just as and when, no particular deadline apart from the end of the year. Yes, and then in terms of the structure of what you learn in first year, it's very structured. So you have your embryology, your andrology modules, rotations actually is what they're called. And then you have your genomics and your genetic counselling rotations, and that's all in year 1. So it's very rotation heavy in year 1 to give you that full introduction, full overview. Then there is no rotations then for year 2 and 3. It's called specialist modules, and it's more sort of academic content rather than visits or being associated with other organizations, like for the genetics elements.
Right. What do you do in rotations? What does it involve?
So again, it depends which lab you're at and which clinic you're at. We did embryology and andrology in-house. So those rotations sort of just looked like your day-to-day clinical work. However, it depends how trained you are. So if you weren't trained in certain procedures, they would focus on those in those rotations for you. But if you are trained, it's sort of just normal clinical work for those. Whereas the genetics, the genetic counselling and the genomics, those were with partner hospitals, which was really interesting, and they were fully remote. At home, you had a month off for each from clinical work, from going to work every day, and you were at home and you'd listen in via Teams to interviews and meetings and patient consultations. And yeah, you learn a lot, but it was all remote. I think that changed post-COVID. And it might change again. It might change back where you have visits to hospitals and clinics and things. But I think they found it easier to manage, as with many things, from a distance. But that was really interesting. I think that's really one of the highlights, because it gave you an insight into how these different fields really do intertwine and overlap, because there is an STP for genetics and genetic counselling. So it's just the crossover is very, very interesting, and how much we actually all help the same people in many ways.
Right, makes sense. So you said the genetic rotations are from home, so you can attend them remotely. Does it apply same to the lectures as well, or do you have to go in person to Manchester Metropolitan University? How does it work?
So mostly you go to Manchester. So for the lectures, for those 3 visits a year, you're in university for those weeks. You're having lectures and seminars and tutorials, which is nice because it takes you back. I mean, it's you are just a student again, and it's actually lovely. And you're all together, and there's about 30 people each year. But they are very flexible and very accommodating. They understand that you're not just a student anymore, and you have other things going on, whether it's work or personal. So if you need to not attend physically, or you need to miss a day or do things remotely, you can. But people do try to be there, and there is a lot of benefits to being there.
Right.
But it's not 100% compulsory. If they are very good, and they will say, they will always say, let us know if we can make anything, more accommodating or more flexible for you.
Right. That's nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So another question I had about, we're talking about funding. So since you're in London, you'll be traveling to Manchester.
Mhm.
For first time, it will be for 3 weeks and then 1 week later on in subsequent years. How does the funding of your accommodation and your travel work in that sense?
So there's a £2,000 budget for each year for all of your travel and accommodation costs. That includes, and you have to be careful because it has to include lots of things. The 3-week visit is, of course, a huge expense, especially for accommodation. You also have to factor in that besides those 3 visits a year, you also need trains for your exams in the summer. So even though you might not need to stay overnight, you still need to get up and back to visit the in-person exam. That's in year 2 and 3. So the £2,000 does have to stretch quite far each year, but I've not heard of anyone that hasn't made that work yet. So although you have to be careful, it should be fine. It should cover everything that you need.
Right, makes sense. So in terms of grading, when you're studying in your all the 3 years, how are you graded? Do you appear for any exams? Do you have to write essays?
So it's varied. So over the 3 years, there's different types of assessments. You are assessed sort of continuously over your training activities, and that's with your workplace. And that's not a formal assessment. That is, is it ticking all the boxes that they need or not? So it's sort of a pass, not pass fail, because you can't really fail them because they'll talk to you about them, guide you, and then ultimately you'll keep working on it until it does tick all the boxes. So that's the informal assessments. And then the more formal ones, as part of the masters, as part of the university, you have an exam each summer. So in first year it's online, in second and third year it's in person, written in a hall in Manchester, sort of how the typical exam would be. And then the 2 pieces of work that you've sort of got in each year vary. So I did a patient information leaflet in first year, and a reflective piece. So that was about a situation that maybe you found difficult and you had to write it in a certain way, and sort of as a critical style reflective piece. And then in second year, I have done an essay and a project proposal. So that's sort of the university work, and that is formally graded. So that is, fail, pass, merit, distinction, and that's sort of with the university guidelines, the regulations, and those sorts of things. And then in third year, I believe the project is the majority of it. I don't think there's any other university marked work apart from the project itself because it's so big. It's a full thesis for your masters. So I think that's it, but I'm not in third year yet. So,
Right,
don't
right,
quote me on that. And then I think the presentation is unmarked. I think that's more for experience and to build, your portfolio of presenting. And then there's a final written exam in third year.
right. So the written, so the written exam, I think just evaluates everything that you have studied over the 3-year course period, I think.
Yes. Yes,
Right,
and you get a choice. So you have to do 2 essays in the written exam, and in the exam you get 2 questions for each essay. So there's a choice. So I think you will have 4 topics, and as long as you pick one topic from each side and do 2 full essays, that's sort of how it works.
right, right. How did you study for everything? Do you use any kind of books, any websites that you have?
So I mainly stick with the content from the lectures and what's given by the university, because I think the people that run it, who are fantastic, they obviously are the people that design the exams and also design the lectures and the content. So I think it's wise to stick to that because it's likely going to be something that they've focused on in their content. Also, their suggested reading, because if they're going to put something in, or they're they're going to award extra marks. It's good to have done the suggested reading, I think, through the university, and follow all of their guidance. And I think it's more straightforward that way as well, because then you're getting reliable information, and you're not wasting your precious time. There's so much to do that I think sticking to the recommended reading is wise.
Right, right. Is there a plan that you follow? So do you use only your study days allotted to you, or do you study often more than that?
So I do just use my study days. I think it's really important to have a work-life balance, and with the STP, there is room for you to run with everything, and you could, for every single training activity, which there are about 30 pieces of work per year for those, you could spend unlimited time on them. So I think
Yeah,
it's important that you set limits and you stick to your study days and stick to those 8 hours. And I'm not saying I always use those 8 hours. I might do 6 hours and then pinch a couple of hours from somewhere else. It's not always set in stone, but I do try and limit it to 8 hours a week so that you're not overworking yourself. In terms of planning, though, I do plan, because I think that makes those 8 hours more effective. So I have, well, I think it's actually just with our lab, they made an Excel spreadsheet, but I'm sure many labs do it, with all the training activities on there. And what I did at the beginning of each STP year is go through those and basically make myself a little deadline for each of them. I don't always stick to them, but at least it's a guideline for, okay, April's just finished. Have I completed the training activities that I assigned myself for April? And that way it just gives some structure to the year, and therefore you don't end the year and say, oh my goodness, I've missed this and
yeah,
this. So
yeah.
but yeah, that's up to you. No one does that for you. You don't have to do that. It's just, I think time management is probably one of the key things when there's so many elements of what's going on in the STP.
Right, right. So I think you don't study a lot continuously every evening after work, but you make a
No.
plan. You allot certain days to study, and
Yes.
then that's enough, I think. Yeah,
Yeah.
right. Can you also tell us a bit more about how your day looks like when you are there in Manchester?
In Manchester, so in the mornings I would get a coffee and meet the other STP. I say girls because it is all girls in my year. Um, but I know other years are mixed. We meet, it's very sociable. You go to your lecture usually at 9 a.m. And the day starts from there, really. You have your timetable. Buildings can change, so you might walk between buildings for different lectures, but you're on campus all day. You normally have lunch together, which is nice. And you only see these people sort of 3 times a year, so it's nice you have a big catch up. But yeah, the lectures are good. They're not as formal as my lectures in undergrad, for example. They are the people that run it. It's like a big conversation. They like you to be part of it. It's very interactive. They ask you questions, you ask them questions. It's not sort of just sit and listen like I remember a lot of my undergrad was. It's I would say they're more like seminars and tutorials than formal lectures, which is really nice. I think that's they often say we're all adults in the workplace. We all have jobs. This week is about understanding some more, learning some more, but essentially we're all here for the same goal, and it's not just me stood here talking to you. They make that very clear, and it's a nice atmosphere.
Right, right. So overall, listening to you going through all the STP information, it sounds like everything is good. As in,
Yes.
you have your funding sorted, you have your study days sorted, you also working, you're also earning. So on the other side, so everything is good, but on the other side, do you feel there could be something that could have been improved on the program?
I think the andrology rotation, so andrology and embryology being in the workplace, I think is fine. I think it's practical. I think there could have been a little bit more enrichment there. So maybe some plans to visit other labs, see how other labs work, potentially, in the andrology side of things, going to see some labs that use sort of CASA, for example, or maybe just broadening the access to the content of those rotations,
Right.
potentially. But that's potentially more localized feedback rather than, the school do give a lot of freedom to to how clinics run and how the SCP is run by the local labs. So that could be more localized than widespread. But I think a lot of the girls said the same, that those rotations did feel just a little bit too much like familiar day-to-day working. It would have been good to have sort of broadened horizons just for those 2 bits. And that's in
Right.
first year.
Okay. Right. Nice. So you're graduated now, as in not you are graduated now, but for example, next year you'll be graduating. What next? What do you do after graduation?
So again, depending on your clinic and how you achieve the STP. So in-service STPs will always have employment afterwards because they were employed before. And that's sort of a legal thing. Direct entry, unfortunately, aren't always guaranteed a job at that clinic. And even if they wanted to keep them, sometimes they just can't due to space or, business funding related reasons. So that can be quite tricky, I think. But then having finished the STP, you're very hireable. So I don't think people would struggle. I've never heard of an STP embryologist not being able to find a job afterwards. They get snatched up very quickly. So you are a clinical scientist, you're working in a lab, you are then technically legally responsible for yourself, rather than when you're a trainee and not clinically registered. Of course, there's always a sense of responsibility, but the responsibility ultimately is with your supervisor, whereas once you're registered, it's with you. So I think that's a huge sort of step, but the STP is designed to get you ready for that. So it's not, one day you have no responsibility and the next you have all of it. It's designed to help you develop towards that point. And then you have to continue your professional development, so CPD points, and register those. Anything that you do sort of linked, there's different categories, and this is sort of a whole other thing after the STP that all clinical scientists need to do, and keep up their portfolio updated. Every 5 years it gets audited, I believe, and that's with meetings and going to events and talks and continuing your learning, because it never stops, right? So you have to keep up with that, but it's a lot more low key. So the STP is quite intense, and then you can sort of take your foot off the gas a little bit, and just be aware that it is still in the background, slower, but it's still happening in the background. You are still developing those skills, and naturally you'll still be training, because your clinical responsibilities and your clinical training is unlikely to be done. At our clinic, for example, normally people are still ICSI training as they finish the STP, and biopsy training hasn't begun. So it is normal to continue clinical training even as a clinical embryologist.
Right. Makes sense. So when you say you get clinically registered, do you have to complete any kind of formal registration, or just completing the STP means you're directly registered?
So as part of the STP, you have the university master's element, which hopefully you will pass, of course, and have that master's in clinical science. Then there's the other side of it, which is the HCPC registration. So it is possible, I suppose, to pass one side and fail the other side. So that's really important to consider. Hopefully, of course, you pass all of it and it's all lovely. But the HCPC registration side is a formal interview, sort of a panel interview. It's called the IAC, I believe. It's done on Teams. I'm still a year away from this, but it's a mixed body of people, I think, with slightly different roles and jobs, and they will assess your competence as to whether it is safe to make you a legally clinically registered scientist. A healthcare professional board essentially is going to decide that. So they're two different things, but that panel interview with those people is the final step to be HCPC registered, and that element is the same for the portfolio. So The university element, of course, is STP unique, but that registration is the same for anybody that wants to be registered, has to go through that process.
Right, right. Once you get registered, does it mean you can only work in the UK, or is that HCPC registration accepted globally?
I believe that you are still able to work anywhere. You know, you are a competent embryologist, but the HCPC registration, my understanding is that it's not recognized. So people will appreciate it, I'm sure, if you wanted to, you know, work somewhere else and they would know that you worked to a certain standard. However, it's not internationally recognized. I think it's UK specific.
Okay, right. So since you are doing STP and also you know how the portfolio route works, what route would you recommend to someone who is thinking of getting into STP or thinking about choosing whether to do a portfolio route or a STP route?
I think if you can get onto the STP, whether in service or direct, I think it's a good option. I think it's a strong option. I think it's structured. You know, as we've already said, it's a lot of guidance. There's a lot of pros to it. However, I think if you are in a position where you're waiting and waiting and the STP doesn't seem like a feasible option, the portfolio isn't a bad idea. It just will take careful time management, careful planning, perseverance, and maybe the understanding that you will be doing it for a longer time. You know, it could be 5, 6 years. And you have to be careful. Not that I've done it, but I think you have to be careful to respect work-life balance and just appreciate that if you allocate 4 hours a week, let's say, to the portfolio of your own time, then in 5 years you should have it completed. But it takes routine, and I think, yeah, I hope
Right,
I hope I've articulated that sort of well.
right.
But
No, it works. It's makes sense very well. Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah. Having said that, um, is there anyone who you would not recommend doing STP?
I think if you didn't enjoy university or didn't enjoy being a student, then it's not for you. I know not everybody likes university. I know a lot of people do a degree and think, oh, not for me. Um, and, you know, potentially that's maybe not the way to go. I think in that sense, the portfolio is perfect for you because then you're building your portfolio practically. And yes, you have the interview at the end, but you don't have to do the study element, the university element, and you don't have to do the masters. So I think if you're someone that doesn't like being a student, then yes, the portfolio is better for you.
Right, right. And also, I think you also answered my next question, which was if you hadn't been on STP, would you be still continuing on the portfolio route?
Yes.
Right. Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think that sums up everything about STP. Um, so coming back to the embryology side of the career as an embryologist,
Mhm.
someone who is trying to get into this field, apart from STP and all the course and everything, do you have any advice for aspiring embryologists?
I think be patient. I think it's certainly not an easy path. I think a lot of people have a lot of difficulties, you know, getting their foot in the door. Um, so understanding that at the beginning, I think will save a lot of frustration. Um, and I think we're seeing that more and more as more juniors come through. There's potentially an increased weight because it's getting more popular. I think people are talking about IVF more. It's a bigger industry now, and I think more people are aware of the job role, and that's why it's becoming more popular. So I think patience, but also understanding that once you are in, it is a fantastic job. It's very rewarding. It's if you love science and you also love a patient-facing role, it is a brilliant job to do. But yeah, that beginning bit can be tough. But once you are trained, which only doesn't take long, it's not, you know, in the grand scheme of things, 5 years, for example, is not a huge amount of time. So once you are trained, and I look at the seniors at my clinic, for example, then it's smooth sailing from there, right? So it's just the beginning bit, understanding that it's a bit turbulent, and then once you're through it, I think then it sort of pays you back.
Right. Right. Makes sense. Yeah, I agree. Now, also, you are almost there at the end finish line of STP and getting fully registered as a clinical embryologist. What's
Mhm.
next for you? Are you thinking of doing a PhD, going into research, or still continuing with with your current clinical job?
Definitely continuing clinically. Clinical work will carry on. PhD potentially one day, who knows?
Okay.
I did I did a master's alongside my first embryology job. Um, and then this with the SCP is another master's. I then did a course, a bioethics course with Oxford Uni recently. So there's definitely something that wants to keep going. Um, well, a PhD is a big jump though, so we'll see. But yes, maybe one day. I think the good thing is in the industry is that there are so many opportunities. Not only is there the HSST, which is the STP PhD version,
Okay.
um, there's also options to do part-time PhDs and yeah, so never say never, I guess.
Right, right. I think one step at a time. There's still
Yeah.
so many things to learn, and also with more research and more technological advancement, you'll have more things to learn. So yeah,
Yeah.
one day. Yeah.
Yeah.
Last couple of questions for you. Where do you see embryology or IVF 50 years from now?
Good question. I actually went on a microscopy workshop recently, and we
Uh-huh.
were all talking about this in quite a lot of detail. Um, I think a lot of the practical elements will be automated, and I think that will be game changing. I don't think it will replace us because gametes and embryos are so fragile um, that there's always going to be a human element. But I think in 50 years, there's going to be so much that is done by robots um, that it will reduce the amount of basically working with our hands. I think we will be overseeing procedures um, and will still be needed for, the embryo transfer element and the egg collection element, but the bits in between in the lab, I think dish setup will be automated. I think ICSI will be automated. Freezing, thawing, I think all of that will be automated. So I think it will be very different. I think, but in terms of the knowledge of it all and how it all works and when things go wrong. So the troubleshooting, I think, will be so key and so complicated that they'll still need us. Um, and the HFEA won't allow things to be risky or unsafe. So we will always be
Right.
needed. So I don't fear that part. But I do feel like, a steady hand is not going to be such a key thing in 50 years because the robots will do it for us. I think there'll be a huge focus on genetics. I think embryologists and and the elements of genetics that we have now, it'll all be combined. And I think embryologists will be genetic experts. We all know a bit and what we need to know, but I think it'll be a huge part in the future. And I think everyone will have PGT. I think that'll be a routine in 50 years. And there'll probably be something extra as well,
Yeah.
even more
Yeah,
that we
that's
can
true.
do that we've not even thought about.
That's true.
So I think, but the good thing is, I think the HFEA, they're so strict here and they will prevent things moving too quickly or going too crazy or, all of these potential problems of designer babies and all these things that we have in our ethics chats. And those things will be fine, I think, because the HFEA won't allow that to happen. But yeah.
Yeah, it's so fascinating, isn't it? With all the
Yeah.
research, there are so many new things coming up. So it has a promising future. It just, I think, has to be well regulated in
Mhm.
terms of technology and everything automation related stuff that you can do in the lab. I think it has to be
And
well
hopefully
regulated.
I'm retired in 50 years anyway. I should
Yeah,
be. Yes, I
yeah, so,
definitely should be.
yeah. So less worries on your head, I think. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's true. Right. Last question for you today. If
Mhm.
you have to describe embryology or IVF in one word, what would it be?
Two very different questions. I think to describe IVF in one word,
Uh-huh.
hard.
Okay.
I think to describe embryology in one word, rewarding.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So I think, yes, I think being an embryologist, I think is very rewarding. And I think embryology as a whole, incredible. But yes, IVF, very, very difficult. Um, and very fragile, I think.
Right. Well, that I think sums up our episode today. Everything about NHS STP is discussed in this episode. If our listeners still have more questions, you can anyways ask us in the comment box, or we are also going to add our LinkedIn handles in the description below. You can directly connect us on LinkedIn and ask more questions over there. Thank you so much, Georgia, for your time today and also sharing all the details about STP. I think our listeners won't need any other video on STP or how to become embryologist in the UK. You have summed up everything very well. So thank you so much for your time and thank you for doing it.
And thank you very much for having me.
All right. Thank you so much. See you all in the next episode.